Hello and welcome to the Maurer podcast, where we view the world through the lens of design. I'm your host, Jill Maurer, and today I am joined by my trusty... Are you a sidekick?
I guess.
Artimus. Today, we're talking all about the Thai rescue of
the whole podcast? Special edition here?
We are. Artimus and I were both just enthralled by the whole thing. It was absolutely an amazing design puzzle. I think everybody, well, not everybody, but I mean a lot of people, a lot of the world was really watching this whole rescue from the beginning, and looking at it through the lens of design is an interesting way to view it because it was a big design puzzle, starting from even just trying to find the boys and then when they found them, how to do the rescue. We didn't really want to talk about it until it was resolved, partly because, I mean, I don't know how superstitious I am, but I just didn't want to jinx anything. I mean, we were just holding our breaths. Mm-hmm. And the one diver passed away. It was very, very sad. And, trying to rescue the boys. And it was awful. And at that point, we still didn't know if the team would get out. And now the team is out and everything is resolved. So I feel okay talking about it. It's it's at the same time, it's bittersweet, like a lot of things in life. It was really an amazing story, an amazing rescue. The first thing is, what on earth were they doing in there? Basically, I don't really understand Thai culture completely, obviously, but there's a lot of lore and heritage when it comes to caves. And so they were going into the cave as a team. The soccer team, I think it's the Wild Boar soccer team, that the children were between 11 and 16 years old, I think, and their coach is 25 years old. And they were going in they wanted to celebrate one of the boys' birthdays in the cave, and little known to them, but I think they ended up celebrating two of the boys' birthdays in the cave. But they thought they were just going in for the day or for a couple of hours. And
yeah, they were planning sort of a birthday picnic that day. And mm-hmm. That cave apparently has a lot of spiritual. I mean, cave diving in general has a lot of spiritual connotation.
Well, they weren't diving at the time. At the time, there was no water.
By cave diving, I mean they're going into a cave.
Into a cave, spelunking or whatever. Yeah. So, and there were apparently some really tight parts of the cave. And one of the things I want to say up front is that there are a lot of conflicting reports before and after about this cave, and about this whole situation. So some of the things that we've heard have been contradicted. It's unclear what's true, and so we may state something that is patently untrue that turns out to be untrue. But we're just looking at what
we're gonna do our best with right. an internet connection over here,
right? Because in the beginning they said, "Oh, the boys walked in. They walked in, and then the waters rose, and so that's why they had to dive out." Well. But part of where they came out, they said it was only like 15 inches of clearance. Clearly, they didn't walk into that. The water didn't cause anything to close up. So they must have wedged themselves through parts of this cave to go in.
And let's talk about this cave for a second, because this cave is sort of miraculous the way it's, how nature has sort of designed it. So it's basically this huge, about 10-kilometer stretch of just weird winding caverns, some of it open, some of it not. And some of the maps that they released when they were outlining what the divers would have to do to get the boys out showed the shape of certain tunnels, and some of it wasn't, didn't look like you could almost fit a human in there. So I'm sure there were parts that
I don't think you could fit this human through there. I mean, I saw some, I saw some of the stuff they were going through, and maybe I would fit through there, but I certainly wouldn't want to try. I mean, there is just no chance. And I will tell you that I do have a diving license, but it's an open water license.
Oh, that's right. You were talking about, while this was happening, some of the comparisons between the different levels of diving certification.
Yeah. And
that sort of stuff, which is interesting because when these things sort of happen, I think I was telling you, I try to do... It sounds stupid, but when something like this happens, one of the biggest frustrating parts for me, especially as sort of a filmmaker, artist sort of thing, is to I want to understand, have empathy for the situation. I don't dive, so I wanted just some sort of frame of reference. So one of the days, I think it was a few days before the dive, before the rescue mission, I went out to my pool at my apartment complex, and I was trying to run drills of swimming on the bottom of the pool, full length and back, just to sort of get an understanding of like holding your breath for super periods of long time, just to get an understanding of it. And I remember texting you, after I got out of the pool, I was just like, no, just there's no way. I don't think, I'm glad I'm not in charge of doing this, because I don't think I have what it takes. And most of it was the limestone. The cave is made of mostly like limestone and hard granite, and I told you that at one point I scraped my stomach on the bottom of the pool. It wasn't bad, but I remember thinking like I couldn't imagine doing that without visibility, being a child, scared, probably malnourished from having not had decent food in several days, being completely unprepared to dive, and on top of that you're scraping against actual cave exterior.
Yeah, so I wouldn't frankly want to go into that cave with no water. Like I am just simply uncomfortable with crawling into small spaces, and then I'm just uncomfortable with that. Like I won't go into the crawl space of a house. And it's not so much that I'm afraid of small spaces, it's more about not knowing what else is in there and not being sure that I can get out. So there are some, like I've been in a sensory deprivation tank. I'm fine with that, but I wouldn't have been in there with no water. First of all, I will say, I don't know, like we all know, or I don't know if we all know, but I'm fascinated with the Lascaux cave. That's where the prehistoric art was. And I have seen the people who went into that original one, and you have to be a small person to get in there, because there are definitely parts where you just squeeze through. And that would never happen for me. You see pictures of tourists now in the Lascaux cave, but the truth is that is a mock-up of the cave. To see the original cave, you've got to spelunk, and it's not something I would be willing to do. And this was such a dangerous rescue, and we can talk about some of that, and I do have some experience with diving, not that it's a great deal, but part of this whole design, looking at this through the lens of design, is that what they were trying to do is not have to have these children dive, because they really wanted that to be the last resort. There were, in addition to the divers who found the children and then made a plan for getting them out, there were people who were above the cave trying all different kinds of approaches to get them out, drilling. They were trying to do anything but have them die.
Yeah, so that's the that's the scenario they had, right? And I think that's when I first started, because I had heard that some kids went to a cave and we hadn't found them yet, and then I came here and you had said, oh, they had found them, and that's sort of when I came in at it. Was here's the problem: we finally. Oh, did you read about how they found them exactly?
Yes, but I had been watching it before they found them, and so it was just amazing that they found them alive.
It's such a great story. So they're looking for the kids, and they know they're in this cave. They know they're somewhere, but again, it's huge. And so some of the first divers, apparently what happened was,
and they don't know if they're dead or alive.
They're not sure. They don't know what they're going to find. So they're diving through this cave, just this huge distance, takes hours to get into, in this murky water you can't see in. And as they're doing it, they're dropping a line so that other divers can find them and they can find their way out, because it's a mapped cave, but you don't know what's going to happen if you can't see. So he's dropping a line. They run out of line. And when he runs out of line, they go up. And when they go up, that's when they find the kids. They're on this shelf, this granite sort of shelf, and the kids are just sort of there. And they're like, hey, how's it going?
Right. And if you haven't seen it, there is video footage of this, and it is amazing. Everybody's surprised.
Yeah, that shot that you just know is going to be in the movie of them just sitting on the shelf, like wide-eyed, like, oh my God, like we're going to be saved.
And the divers, of course, the boys are from Thailand, and the divers who happened to find them. Now, there were plenty of Thai divers that were down there. People from all over the world came together to try to find these children and eventually save them. And the two that happened to first discover them were English, and were speaking English. And so it's sort of this, a couple of them can understand some of the words, and it's an interesting little conversation. And
apparently only one of the kids spoke English, which was interesting, because he was sort of the go-between between diver and the rest of the team.
Yeah, eventually they got more Thai divers down there, but there was a doctor who stayed with them, I think, most of the time, who was Australian. It was, and
One of the first questions they asked was, what day is it? Like they had lost...
No idea. They couldn't see the sun. They had no idea how long they had been in there. And then they thought, okay, good, we're going to get out today. You found us, we're going to get out. And that wasn't the case. So it was 10 days before they were found, and then it was several more days that they stayed in there. Now, and the other part of this whole thing was, as they were trying to figure out how to get them out, they were doing several things. One was they were pumping water out. Now, let me just say that as a mom, one of the things that was reported was that there were all kinds of signs saying, don't continue, it's monsoon season.
I'm not 100% certain I would go into a cave. I have certain fears that would probably keep me from doing so. So I look at it since I came in at the point where, okay, they're in the cave, here's where it is, I'm like, I was sort of puzzle driven, but I agree that there's no way that,
I have been in a cave.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I've been in caves in Virginia and also in Arizona. I don't have a problem necessarily with going into a cave that that is well known and is well traveled. I'm not going to squeeze my body through any part. If I have to squeeze my body through, that is an indication to me that I should not be there. Mm-hmm. So I will stay on the other side, and no thank you. We all have this risk-reward thing that we do, whether we realize it or not. And my risk-reward algorithm says that I am willing to scuba dive. But it says I am not willing to jump out of a plane. I'm not willing to we all have our own thing. Mine definitely says we are not squeezing through anything to get to anywhere in a cave.
So 13 people trapped in a cave about 10 kilometers in. The rain came in as they went in, so they can't really just walk out, and they're trapped there. And at this point, they just started floating every idea under the sun. Some people said, drilling?
Yeah, so one of the things they started doing was draining the cave, so draining the water. So as fast as they could, they were draining water out. Now, there was problems because the water was coming in. So you have issues of, as that water goes in, now your oxygen is cut off because there is no airflow to and from the cave because there were certain points in that cave that were completely covered with water. And so they are, they're breathing and they're using up the oxygen. The oxygen, the air that we breathe normally has 21% oxygen. They were down to 15% oxygen. So some of the things they were doing was pumping water out of the cave and trying to pump oxygen into the cave. Then there were people above, and there were some problems above where one group of rescuers were in a pretty bad car accident. I think everybody did survive. It was a truck accident. It got turned over on the cave. It was pretty bad. So they were up there trying to figure out if there was a way to drill in or if there was some sort of crack or something that they could get through the top.
They found it. They knew there was sort of a tunnel. I'm not sure if it was mining, but it was some tunnel. They said, well, if we're going to drill, it was sort of like that movie Armageddon. They're like, well, we should find the lowest possible place to not waste drilling. So they thought that they maybe could access that place through a tunnel. So yeah, they were looking for everything.
Then again, is the drilling going to make it collapse? Are we going to hurt the boys drilling? So there was all that. And there were I saw many divers and former U.S. Navy SEALs saying, under no circumstances should you take those boys out, via the way they came in, because diving is just too dangerous. And I will tell you, just from the limited experience I had, so when you get an open water license, you start in a swimming pool. And not only did these boys not have any diving experience, several of them couldn't swim at all. And I saw grown people who couldn't get their diving license. They, washed out of diving right away because they couldn't get past this concept of having a respirator in your mouth, being underwater, and breathing from a tube. And it is a weird experience. And you're just, in the beginning, just sitting on the floor of 3 feet of water, and you need to sit there for something like 20 minutes to pass this just this first little step, and a lot of people wash out right there. And it's because it is a weird experience. Your throat is almost in a way sort of forced open. When you normally breathe, you're breathing through your mouth and your nose, and you can alternate. So if you have something in your mouth, you breathe through your nose. If your nose is clogged, you breathe through your mouth. Where you start panicking is your nose is out of play. You can't breathe out of that. Now, if you have to cough, if you have to sneeze, all of that happens underwater. I don't even know what would happen if you had to throw up. There are things that you just realize that your airway, which you unconsciously are constantly protecting, is not completely protected. And there are people who panic due to it. And that is literally somewhere where they could just stand up and call it off. And they still panic to the point that they wash out.
Right.
So you add to that the water is freezing, you're exhausted, and you're oxygen deprived. The water is freezing, you can't see. That water was murky, muddy water. And you're going to have something above you. Even just when you have tanks on and you're just swimming in the water, one of the biggest fears is what's behind you, what's back there, because you can't turn around in the same way, and your life support is on your back and you can't see it and protect it. So that's also panic driving. And now you're going to have to squeeze through something. There's all kinds of reasons to panic. That was the
video moment. Remember I sent you the copy of that video they'd released of one of the divers actually going through one of the passages. Tank wasn't on his back. He had it sort of in front of him. And not only is he like shoving it through, and this is like a GoPro wide angle lens, and it barely fits in there. He's pushing the tank through, and then he's like moving. And at some point, his head gets in a position where he can't even lift his head up or down. He has to just keep wiggling through. I was just like, nope.
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 Not going to happen. I did see some video of them drilling. They were literally drilling part of the cave up to open. Now, the good news, everything has a silver lining. The good news is those boys knew they got in. If they got in, they could get out. Mm-hmm. Because when I looked at that, I thought, I don't even know literally if I could get through that. And then, some of those guys are... some of the men looked like they were smaller, but one of those divers looks like, a normal tall guy with big shoulders. And he got in and out. But the man who did pass away, that's how he passed away. He got stuck there. He ran out of air. He passed out. If you're going to panic, that's where you're going to do it. And by the way, panic is the fastest way to die when you are diving.
And that absolutely put this whole thing in perspective, because when word got out that a trained diver with years of experience, not just a diver on the weekends, not a diver who, had a whim one summer and learned how to do it, someone who is trained to do one thing, and that is dive, be one of the best divers, dies in this cavern. And it's
to a level. So, when you have a normal license, you have the open water, then you can get, your next level is it allows you to go deeper, and you can cave dive, and then next level is rescue diver. Whatever that guy had is eons above this. Like normal, just regular people walking around couldn't possibly get the level of training he had. You only get it in the military. And he didn't survive it, and you're going to send through an 11-year-old boy who can't swim.
That was probably the ice, like the cold ice water of reality over the situation. Because before that, it was like, well, you got the best divers on the planet. I'm sure, wow, stakes just got raised. A trained diver just passed away in this cave. So What are we going to do about these kids?
Right. And it got to the point, the reason that they did go ahead and decide to pull them out is they felt that they had no choice, that this was the way they had to go, and there was only a certain window because the oxygen had fallen from 21% to 15%. Now, the good news is they had been able to feed them. There were things that they were able to do, but some of those boys were not in good shape. And they the rains were coming, and so it was going to get worse. They'd gotten enough water out that parts of the path where you used to have to dive through, you could now walk through. So you still had to dive through part of it, and there were still those small squeezes, but at least there were parts of it that you could walk through, which cut the time down. It had been taking the guys 6 hours, these trained men, 6 hours to get in, 5 to come out. But they were able to cut off 2 hours of this path because there were certain areas that you could now walk through.
And they said that by the time they had done the first rescue mission, they obviously had to stop pumping while the mission was going on. They had pumped out at least 20 Olympic-sized swimming pools, not your local pool, Olympic-sized swimming pools where the water, the second they stopped pumping, the water level rose about 10 centimeters. So the the rain had already started. Like that rain season that the signs warned about had already started.
Yeah, and I don't know if you saw this report, but just after they got that coach out, so they got all the boys out first, and then they got the coach out. Right after that, the pumping system failed.
Okay, so the kids walk in there June 23rd with their coach. They're not discovered till July 2nd. The rain's already started, and the rescue mission only starts happening, July 4th, 5th? Let me look up the date that the first mission was.
Right, because when those boys first saw that man pop out of the water, they thought, oh, good, we're going with him. He'll take us. No, they were in there days after that. And they were able to get a doctor in. So there was a doctor who was also one of these killer, diver guys. And he went in and in the beginning apparently was just treating them for minor things, cuts and whatever. And of course, they were hungry. They lost an average of about 4 pounds. These are children who didn't have that to lose. So he actually stayed with them, is my understanding, for that whole time and was evaluating them.
Which probably was a good morale boost of just having, because we're getting updates on Twitter and online. These kids have, all they know is what this diver that pops up from that water tells them. So
right, and I don't know. There are differing reports, because the first report I heard said, okay, what they're going to do is they're going to take the weakest boys out first. They may be unconscious, which is perfectly reasonable. If they were unconscious, that is a perfectly reasonable way to take them out. But that they were going to get the weakest boys out first. When they came out, they had the choice of either ambulance or helicopter. They would take, if they were in bad shape, they would take them by helicopter. And if they were in reasonably good shape, they'd take them by ambulance. My understanding is they took the first 4 that came out, they took 2 by helicopter, so they were in pretty bad shape. But they said they were going to get the weakest out first. Then they said they got the strongest out. I've heard both
The second
things.
they started that mission, the second they started the first dive to go in there to find the first batch of kids, they had told the media to leave. And the second that happened, we were talking about it, I was just like, we're going to get a lot of misinformation. So everything we read online, it's the way the 24-hour news has evolved. There's a lot of good things and there's a lot of bad things. One of the bad things is that other news stations now somehow count as first and second sources. So all someone like... so without dropping any names, all News Network A has to do is wait for News Network B to say a number on Twitter, and officially that's a confirmed source.
I will drop a name. So I was looking when the first came out, they would say, at first they said it was 3, then they said it was 4, and then, because I was looking at several sources trying to figure out what was going on, and one of the sources I looked at was Reuters, and Reuters said 6 were out, not 4 to 6, not that 6 were out, and that they had confirmed that with somebody. Well, the next day you learn, nope. And then the other thing they did was the parents, the family members, didn't know which children had come out first. And so they got everybody away. They put up the tarp so that you couldn't see. And they just told the family, we're not going to tell you who's coming out first. The family decided they would all stay there until all of the boys were out. That's one thing that I heard reported, and then that later changed.
Then I saw an article a day later that said that no, the parents have already seen their children through the glass. So. Well,
but see, what happened was for several days they didn't have glass. They honestly did not know which children were out, so there was a lot of stress. And one of the things they said to him is, listen, you wouldn't be able to see them anyway. They need to be quarantined. And I think part of that was that they didn't want... this is me guessing, by the way, that they did not want anybody campaigning for who got out first and who didn't.
Yeah, there's going to be some amount of influence or, even just panic or just, there's already a stressful enough situation. Why add that in?
Right, and it's not clear whether it was better to come out first or not. The fact that everybody got out of that cave, all of the... Of course, not everybody. There was the one death, but all of the people who had initially gone in and were the target of the rescue, the fact that they all got out is nothing short of miraculous. The fact that there was 100% survival rate there is amazing. And so, it wouldn't have been clear whether it was an advantage to be one of the first group or not. And I think that they needed to be left alone to focus and do their job at that point. But at the same time, in the beginning, they made the conscious decision to to really put it out there on social media because they needed the help. They needed the help to find the boys, and then they needed the help to rescue them. But once they decided, yep, this is a go, then they needed to be left alone for a little bit. And I understand that.
Yeah.
I mean,
is there anything cooler than a specialist? I mean, you think about humans and whether or not we affect the planet in a positive or negative way, whether or not, our drive to, harm each other, hurt each other, cause pain, pollute the planet, destroy the universe, whatever it is. I think the one time when I start having real, true faith in humanity is when there's specialists involved. When you have that relief of, wow, these kids are in a cave. This is a disaster. We're not going to be able to get them out. And then you realize that, all right, we're going to send a handful of guys of the whole planet. These guys have been trained to do one thing. If there's anybody that can get them out of this cave, it's them.
I did grow up on military bases, and I am familiar with this type of person who specializes in these rescues. And by the way, these guys know how to do what they do, not just for rescue. There are other military advantages to having people be able to do what they do. But a lot of what they do is rescue, and usually who they're rescuing is, so my slant is coming from, I was a child during the Vietnam War. My father was in the Vietnam War, and what these guys did was rescue pilots who went down. And the way that this worked is if you're a pilot in the military, you have your own specific little code phrase. You come up with it. It's filed with the military. And so what happens is if you are ever lost, somebody will appear to you and say A, and then you're going to say B, they're going to say C, you're going to say D. So it's this back and forth. And this way, and it is unique just to you. There's nobody in the world who knows it but you and sort of central military intelligence. So I've heard stories of guys in Vietnam who were shot down. They're away from their plane. Their instructions are just sit in the jungle and you will be found. Mm-hmm. That's it. And that's what they do. And then that's who appears is these Navy SEALs or these SEALs. And they just come up and they're going to say, the king is whatever your code is, and then you damn well better come up with, and people say, they panic. It's their own code, and they panic because they're sitting here going, I've been out here for days. I haven't seen a soul. How are you suddenly right next to me?
Yeah.
Well,
and military in general, whether it's Navy, Air Force, that's the best. That's probably like the most well-funded, well-achieved form of specialized human beings that we've been able to put forward. Mm-hmm. I love movie plots where you suddenly have someone who has military training is put in a just higher than normal civilian risk situation. The aliens attack. Who do we got in the room? We got a baker, a cook, and a Navy SEAL. Okay, well, we know who's in charge.
Right.
He's the one guy in the corner just sharpening the blade, just like he's ready to go. He's already got a plan. Just that sense of no matter what happens, you don't panic, because if you panic, who's going to do this?
It's interesting. I've only had one personal experience with something similar, and that was when I was in Alaska. And my father was a pilot, and we would take a pontoon plane out, and we landed in the middle of nowhere where nobody had ever fished, and we're standing out there and we're fishing, and we run across a bear. And my father, he just kind of looked around. He had a gun. He was sort of panicking, and the other guy just put his hand up silently, and he was just this guy that was with us, a friend of my dad's who was in the military, put his hand up and he just said, just stay behind me. And he grabbed a gun, and when he did, you could see that wasn't at all unusual for him. There was the hand and the gun, and it was, I don't even know how to describe how calm and how much an extension of his hand that gun was. Mm-hmm. And he was so calm, and we were all so calm just staying behind him that there was no need to kill the bear. The bear, and I'm talking about a Kodiak bear. This is a giant thing. It wasn't my first run-in with a bear, but it was my calmest. Comes right up to us. We just stand there. He's just standing there looking at the bear, and the bear decides, I think I'm going to go over there, and just walks away.
Whatever this is over here, I want no part of it.
Right, but he wasn't panicked. He was just like, oh, okay, well, they're fine. I'm fine.
Yeah. See, that's awesome, because he probably still had that internal natural form of panic, but what he doesn't allow is for it to overcome his physical body. He doesn't let his mind betray him.
I don't think that man was panicked.
Really?
I honestly don't. I think that there are probably situations that would panic that man, but not just a bear. The only time that he was concerned was really for us. It wasn't for him. And once he had us, we were like little ducklings behind him. Once we were behind him, then he felt like, okay, well, now I'm in control of this. And they're going to, that bear's going to have to get through me to get to them. He's not going to get through me. This is going to end one way or the other. Either we're all going to walk away or we're going to walk away and the bear's going to be dead. Rather the bear not be dead. But, I can't even tell you how calm this man was.
Right.
And how calm I was. Because suddenly I was like, oh, okay, it's a bear. Right. Obviously he's got this. So Artimus, one of the things that he kept saying to me during this is going to be a movie. No matter how this ends up, it's going to be a movie. There are already people, I'm sure, planning to make this movie. I can see how this movie is going to play out.
They've already got producers' boots on the ground as we speak right now.
They do. Not only that, they are already declaring that this space, this cave, is going to be a museum.
Yeah.
And
some people were calling for it to be renamed after the perished diver, which I thought was an interesting idea.
That's an interesting idea. The the concept of this becoming a museum is a little odd to me. Like, I don't know.
I know how you are. You're like, you would put up a gate,
lock
it up, throw away the key.
I do. I just want to be like, no children, nobody, no. The mom in me is going, oh, wait a minute. Let's make sure this doesn't happen again. Yeah, there were all kinds of people trying to see, how they could do this. So,
well, compared to Apollo 13, right? You have a couple of astronauts like thousands of miles in space with a basically in a giant piece of, basically a trailer at that point. It didn't work 100% properly. They're running out of oxygen, and you got to figure out a way to get them and hit a mark that's so thin that if they miss it even by a couple of inches, that whole thing's incinerated. To reverse that, now you've got people that are only a couple of kilometers underground, yet for some reason the scale of rescuing them is the exact same as rescuing
it's pretty rough. And then
missions.
Once they got them out, they're worried about some sort of cave disease, certain elements, certain parasites. I don't know if it's parasites or just bacteria or whatever that they could have in them.
There's got to be some medical issue with being in a cave for longer than a couple of weeks.
There were issues, so they didn't just walk right out of the cave. They had a base camp there at the cave. Part of that was they had to get their eyes blocked because, they hadn't seen sunlight for, at that point, a couple of weeks. You can't just go out into the sun, so they had to do that. They gave them oxygen to try to help get their body back to having oxygen.
I bet they lined up vitamin shots for everybody.
I'm sure.
Vitamin D, gotta get the
but
vitamin C going.
They can't. It's not like they could have a hamburger. You can't be eating that little for that long. Now, for the 9 or 10 days they were fasting, other than the water. After that, they'd been feeding them something, but it was probably, military liquid something. And then the whole community came together. So I saw some interesting stories where, like, for 4 days or something, the uniforms weren't clean. And I mean, God knows, they were awful. They were muddy messes. You could hardly recognize them even as pants, and they were just putting them on again. And so this woman said, you know what? I have a laundry company. Let me just tell you, I'm going to come and get it. She would come and get it at night. She had volunteers who would stay there, and they washed all of the stuff and delivered it early in the morning. And then you had people making food for all the family members. There were different people praying and doing different things.
FIFA gave them, they reached out to them and they said that they were going to give all the boys tickets to the final, which plays in a couple of days, and they unfortunately rejected because they, we're in the hospital. We can't really make that trip. But
that's not going to happen.
That's the level of how involved the world got with this.
Yeah, but just the people around who just said, listen, I don't know how to dive. I don't know how to, I don't know how to drill. I don't know how to rescue. But what I can do is do the laundry. We hope you enjoyed this special edition of Maurer Glass Podcast. We're relieved that the boys and their coach are home safe and want to thank everyone who helped make it a success. See you next time.